Hi, I'm Jeff Provine, and I'm here to talk to you about plot. So plot is the sequence of events that gets us from the beginning of the story to its conclusion and resolution. So when we were talking about the three parts of a story, character, plot, and setting, we also talked about the story question, which kind of brought all of those together. We defined the story question as the character's goal through the story. So with the plot, this is the path that we're going to follow to see if or if not this character can meet this goal. When you're putting your plots together, a good idea is to see whether you've got a proactive or reactive plot. So a proactive plot is where the protagonist is actively seeking this goal. An example of that might be Dr. Victor Frankenstein. Nobody asked him to play God and create a living man out of dead pieces. But he had to. He was really excited about this goal. So for these reactive stories, this is where the story happens to somebody. We're going along, having your average day, and then something crazy goes on. How about Superman, right? He's got a successful career in journalism. He's trying to hit it off with this gal Lois, and then this comet heads toward Metropolis, and now he has to transform into another identity and go and defeat this comet. Or giant robot, or chemical spill, or alien invasion, whatever's happening that week. So with these proactive and reactive plots, it kind of helps to summarize your starting point. With a proactive plot, you need to instill a desire to do this. This is the journey that the character is going to start off and see whether he can succeed or not before he returns. Or for the reactive plot, you might call this the stranger comes to town. You've got your life going, everything's going great, and then something crazy happens. And now your question is, can you get back to the sense of normalcy? Now that you have your goal in mind, you need to come up with some kind of conflict to keep it from just being handed to your protagonist. Conflict is really the essence of story, and a lot of people try to work and categorize conflict into things like man versus another man, so with your protagonist and antagonist, or man versus nature, trying to overcome this force outside of him. Man versus himself, there's a piece of his character that's keeping him from doing this thing. Or man versus all-you-can-eat buffet, classic tale. With all these different literary classifications, these are great things to study, but at its core, remember that stories are a protagonist seeking a goal. That's it. So we've got a goal and conflict keeping us from this goal, but now the character needs motivation. If you get a chance, read Deborah Dixon's GMC, Goal, Motivation, and Conflict, the building blocks of good fiction. So the goal is the point of the story, and the conflict is what makes it interesting, but the motivation is what glues those two together to make it a really great story. Without motivation, why would your character bother doing this? Dr. Frankenstein had completed medical school. He would have done very well as a private practitioner, but instead he needed to pursue this theory of his. He needed to create life and see how far he could go, which of course led to tragic results. Or when a meteor is heading toward Metropolis, Superman's invulnerable, so why does he care? He can just shrug it off. But he does care because people are going to get hurt, and he doesn't want to see anybody get hurt. He's genuinely a good guy, and he's going to put all of his efforts into that, which he's got superpowers, so it's substantial effort and a pretty cool story. In your writing, show your characters' motivations and their struggles. Pixar, famous for its many movies and many, many awesome movies, has 22 rules of writing, the number one of which is that people admire characters more for their struggles than their successes. And this is something to work into our stories. Show the underdog winning, right? Nobody cares if somebody just shows up and is awesome and then goes home with a trophy. But if you can tell a story about how this guy got up at 4 o'clock every morning, practiced every day until he went to school, practiced after school, struggled for 16 years, and then finally arrived at the Olympics and won gold, that's a pretty good story. Or you could take it even further, and he worked this hard and got bronze, and that's enough. That's what really drives him to see the success on a global stage. Maybe a little flair of tragedy with it, but that's a great story. Having a singular plot is key to tying the whole story together, but as you get into bigger and bigger stories like novels, you have room for subplots. So a subplot is a story kind of woven within the story. As your character is going out on this journey, maybe there are other pieces of things that he needs to accomplish. A classic example of this in the horse race based on true story Hidalgo. So it's man versus nature, but then on the other hand, these guys can sabotage one another. So we have this opponent who's got to be overcome as well as the desert. Or Bridget Jones' Diary. She's trying to get her life under control, which as part of that, she needs to learn how to do dieting and exercise with hilarious results. But your subplot doesn't even necessarily have to be the protagonist. You can have a protagonist of a subplot that's actually just a secondary character. And this is a pretty cool way to explore these other characters. Check them out and see what is interesting about their lives. What are their goals? You do want to watch out to make sure that these secondary characters and their subplots don't take over the whole story. If you've ever seen the movie Failure to Launch, it's about a guy moving out of his parents' basement or something. But the real reason to watch it is Zooey Deschanel fighting a mockingbird. It's amazing. There's a really good example of a larger story packed with awesome subplots in one of my favorite romance movies, Die Hard. So people might say, well, Die Hard's an action movie. It's got explosions and bullets and all kinds of cool stuff like that. And, it's pretty actiony. But at its foundational core, the technical story is that protagonist Bruce Willis is trying to get back with his estranged wife so that they can spend the holidays together as a family. Isn't that nice? However, to do this, Bruce Willis is going to have to overcome terrorists. He's going to have to make fists with his toes and grow a little as a person. But that's just Bruce Willis' story. Within this story, we've got tons of subplots, such as his wife has to keep her identity secret from these terrorists so that they don't have leverage against Bruce Willis. And then there's Professor Snape, and he's there to steal all the money. How about Carl Winslow? So he's a cop and he's trying to overcome this struggle of accidentally killing a kid. And he's been a desk jockey ever since, but now's his chance to be a real cop again. And even Argyle, the limo driver, shows that he's the best limo driver of all time. And this is where we get into really the richness of world building. There's so many protagonists with all these little stories, all skillfully woven into the central plot that it's a man trying to spend the holidays with his family. As we're talking about plot, there's one more thing to remember, and that is people change. So with our characters, if we're making good, round characters, they're going to be altered by the things that happen to them, just as human beings are. We'll start over here with a sense of normalcy, and then through all of these series of events, even if we arrive back home after our hero's journey, we'll still be changed in different people. And this is what we call the character arc. So the best example of this in Western literature is, of course, Back to the Future's George McFly. The story starts off with him as a secretive, goofy, peeping Tom, a nerdy kid who always gets picked on even when he's in his 40s or 50s. The love of his life married him because she felt bad that her dad hit him with the car. But by the end of the story, we've got a guy who's willing to stand up, not just for himself, but to defend other people. The love of his life fell in love with him because he is now the stronger person. And he writes novels. Even the story's overall protagonist, Marty McFly, he goes from being a high school screw-up to a high school screw-up with a truck. So not as interesting as a character. As you're putting your stories together, describe this change. Give it an extra level of depth. It's not just a plot, so showing one event over here, moving all the way to over here with lots of explosions, but how do the characters react to those explosions? What makes them different as a person? Plot is integrally tied to character. You can't have a strong, proactive adventure if the main character is really wishy-washy and not sure deep down whether he or she wants to go on it. There will be no motivation. On the flip side of that, if you have a character who wants this change, there'll be no reason for a reactive plot. They'd happily go on an adventure with any wizard that happens to show up. For more on this, check out episode 2.1. We'll talk about plotting and how to put these sequence of events in a good order that raises the stakes and makes life more interesting for a dynamic character that's traveling along an arc that'll change them forever. This episode's anthology I was in is Whispers from the Abyss. from 01 Publishing. So 01 Publishing is a kind of indie San Francisco publishing house who does all kinds of weird stories, from kaiju sci-fi to time travel post-apocalyptic. The Whispers from the Abyss anthology is the first ever H.P. Lovecraft-inspired collection created specifically for readers on the go, on the subway, during lunch, or even under the fluorescent glow of your cubicle. There is no escape. My story, The Floor, is a little 2-page tale inspired by real life. A few years ago, my wife and I moved into a fixer-upper, a little foreclosure we got cheap, and we hoped to flip it. As we tore out the carpet and saw what was under the walls, it was obvious that some weird things happened in that house. For all we knew, it could have been cultists from Cthulhu. Find your inspiration wherever you can, writers, and keep writing.